Hello everyone, welcome back to our Japanese Sounds. You might notice that this time there is no album next to me, and that for a very good reason. It's because usually in these videos I'm talking about generally things that I own and I explain some things that are related to them. But for this video in particular, we're going to talk about things that I unfortunately don't own. That's because we're going to cover the top 5 most expensive albums of Japanese music that were sold during the last 5 years on Yahoo Auctions. So of course, the real content isn't as clickbaity as the title of the video, but that's for a good reason. First, well, perhaps there are more rare albums out there, but if there are, there is no way to know the price of them. So I'm just going by what was publicly sold, one, but also was sold on public auction, which means anyone can bid. I'm not counting private auctions and so on. I'm only counting things also that had more than one bid, because if there is one bid, it doesn't really tell you much about the price. But if there are multiple bids, you can know that several people have agreed on the selling price. And I'm gonna use this context of taking the most expensive Japanese music albums, at least that I know of, as a pretext to talk a bit about, well, some particularities of Japanese music as a collectible and what we can infer from seeing the prices this got sold for. And you'll see exactly what I mean after we move on with the 5 albums. But without further ado, let's get to number 5. So number 5 sold for 400,000 yen, that's about $4,000. In July of 2016, it's called Kokezaru Kumikyoku by a band that's called Miho Kei Jazz 11. To be honest with you, it's not really the kind of album I usually listen to, but it was pretty interesting to give it a listen. You have a mix between jazz, rock, and a lot of traditional Japanese sounds in it. And you have, to be honest, some pretty big names on the instruments. You have Akira Ishikawa and Takeshi Inomata on the drums. You have Ryo Kawasaki on the keyboards. You really have a lot of big names of Japanese jazz for this recording. And it really shows how money is concentrated in certain genres of music. And it's not only true for Japanese music that a lot of the money is concentrated on rock and jazz, because those genres are a bit older than most of the other genres of music that people collect. Of course, there is also classical, but that's a whole different story. And long story short, a lot of people who listen to jazz or rock music, among them, there are a few that have a lot of dispensable income and that are completely ready to spend whatever is necessary to get the first OG press of a vinyl record. And that's why you have albums like this one, very specific, a very special sound, but it's considered a masterpiece by some people. And that's how you get to the $4,000 range. Next up, sold for 452,000 yen, that's about $4,500 back in February 2020, so not even 6 months ago. It's called A Path Through Haze by Kimio Mizutani, not to be mistaken for the other Mizutani, the guitarist. This one is an album that you could call progressive rock, but only instrumental. It's a bit unique, and it really shows what I said for the previous album, number 5, because you have a lot of concentration of means of people ready to spend money on those particular genres, niches of music. And I think there is nothing wrong with that. Although an interesting point to be made is the album, remember, sold for about $4,500, but right now, as I'm seeing it on Discogs, you can find several for about $2,000 or more. It really shows how much volatility there is on this market of vinyl records, how everything is subject to precise grading in condition, just the state of the market at one particular point, whether the seller has put the right keywords in the title of the auction, depending on that, a different number of people will see the auction. It depends on so many factors, and because those auctions usually end up between 2 buyers putting the highest bids, if one of them decides to leave early, then the auction will end up for a much lower price than it could have. And that's why vinyl records are very dangerous investments, because especially for very niche albums, you can end up with prices that vary widely, as is the case for this one apparently. But in any case, it's a very interesting album, again, if you're into the jazz, rock, prog rock kind of music. But for the 3 following albums, you will see very different types of music, and you might already know the top 3, but let's see. Alright then, sold for 500,000 yen, or $5,000, in December of 2017, is an unnamed album by Linda Carriere that was produced by none other than Mr. Hosono himself, one of the kings of modern Japanese music. And what's interesting about this album in particular, it's the only one among the top 5 that is unreleased, that never got an actual release. And this particular record was just among a few promotional copies of the album. No idea why the album didn't get released, given its popularity today. But most of that popularity comes from the fact that, of course, 1, it's a unique item, never released, but 2, it has some of the biggest names of city pop, modern Japanese music. For instance, Mr. Hosono Haruomi, but also Tatsuro Yamashita, who composed 2 of the, how many songs? 2 of the 10 songs of the album. And thanks to that, you have a unique, funky soul feeling to the album, which was at least recorded, I think, in 1977. So you have that very early, that prototype, you could say, of city pop in it. And I think for that, so of course the quality of the music itself, but also its significance as an album, a collaboration between a Western singer and Japanese producers, composers, artists in general. And you can also have that with the album Amore by Alessandra Mussolini, the granddaughter of Mussolini. But of course that album got an actual release. I can't imagine how high the price would be if that album hadn't been released and just had been under the same form as this one. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here and going to number 2. It's probably an album that you at least have heard of. So yes, number 2, you might have guessed it, is the April Fool's self-titled album. And I probably don't need to introduce that one because it's the first album that Mr. Hosono was ever a part of. It's, I mean, on its own right, it's a pretty good psych rock album, but I guess it's more of the significance of the album, its uniqueness again, the fact that the original has a very limited print run, and that this one sold for 660,000 yen, I think, so about $6,500, is not actually the first release. It was a promotional release on the Musicolor record label that was released at the same time as the original. It was probably a very small press run of the album on a unique promotional label. I don't really know the details because there is not much said about it anywhere, but I guess that for such a unique pressing of a unique album, it does command a special price. And it's interesting to see that it's worth like 3 to 4 times as much as the original. But I guess some people really want to have the most special version of this album. And it makes sense. But when you will see the number 1, you will understand that there is something even rarer than an album like this. And of course, number 1 sold for 1,100,000 yen in September 2017. That's more than $11,000. Is Tatsuro Yamashita's first ever album at Some Music Today. So this album is quite a masterpiece in several ways. First, only 100 copies of it were ever released. That's a figure that is much lower than you would find for even the most obscure albums, because producing simply an album in such small quantities is going to make you lose money rather than gain any. So you always have an incentive to produce more. But I guess back in the day, Tatsuro had so little popularity that he didn't really have a choice to make more. And this album is also pretty unique in the sense that it's made up of only covers of the Beatles. If you're an avid Yamashita listener, you might have noticed that he really enjoys making cover songs of the Beatles. In fact, for instance, in the Big Wave album, almost half of the album is only cover songs of the Beatles, and the other half is songs that resemble a Beach Boys song very much. I mean, the whole album is something that is made to imitate a Beach Boys album. Anyway, this album it's really a perfect storm of everything. It's one of the most famous Japanese artists of all time, but it's also an album that is very unique to that artist. It has a special meaning to the artist who really enjoy the particular group he's making covers of. And thirdly, the press run is extremely small, and we know the number. So having all those factors combining together is really a key for having an album that is extremely expensive, and that's how you get to the $10,000. But honestly, I wanted to take this video, top 5 most expensive albums sold, as a jumpstart, as a point of approach for something I wanted to talk about but didn't find the right context for. It's, well, $10,000, it's a lot, right? But compared to other hobbies, $10,000 isn't that much, and I think that's a particularity of music as a collectible, is that you have such a wide range of things that you can collect. You have a variety of genres, you have a variety of artists, you have a lot of ways to collect music in general. And because of that, even the most expensive albums don't have that high of a ceiling for price. It's very different from something like baseball cards, where the most expensive item in the hobby is clearly identified. Everyone knows the Mickey Mantle of baseball cards. So everyone who collects baseball cards identifies themselves to that particular card, and that's what drives the price up so much. On the other hand, when you're talking about music, well, everyone from every country has different experiences, has grown up in ways that makes them listen to different genres of music. And for that, it makes the price way down, especially because of just the sheer number of albums existing. And because of that, and that's only my personal opinion, of course, but I think that the price of the most expensive albums is way too low compared to what it should be. And of course, there is no real notion of what the price should be. That's only the personal opinion of each one of us. But really, it's because people are not as focused on the most expensive items as people are in some other hobbies. For that reason, people don't tend to realize the sheer difference of value between the most expensive album that's $10,000 and an album that's $1,000 or $100. You have a difference in value, well, subjective value compared to actual price, which is not as linear as the prices would suggest. And I think for an album that only exists in 100 copies of the most famous artist out there, and that is also his first album, well, the value is more than 10 times that of some of his $1,000 album, like let's say the Joy Life triple LP album. That one is almost $1,000, but for 10 times more you can get the holy grail of Japanese music in many ways. So that's really something to think about. And one last small thing I'd like to mention before ending the video, it's that when you get to that level of price, $10,000 and above, you start getting to a level that most people just can't attain. People just can't get the money to buy the item. And that creates a certain invisible ceiling on price that you don't really notice because it's very subtle, and it only happens when you get to the most expensive items in the hobby. And that's how you can really test what kind of people are into the hobby. And for Japanese music in particular, it shows that even the people with the most means, well, aren't the same as the people with the most money for baseball cards, because there are so many baseball cards that are way over $10,000. But Japanese albums over $10,000, I can't quote any other than Add Some Music to Your Day. So that really makes you think, what will happen when the people who currently listen to that type of music, and as we saw for jazz and rock, we have a bit more affluent type of listeners, but for really city pop, that kind of music, a lot of us are really young, don't have a very high income yet. But what about in 10, 20 years? If some of those people listening start becoming millionaires and are still listening to those albums, well, you will start getting a lot more, well, if only a certain very small number of albums are made available for a particular title, and the people who really want it have no actual limit on what they can spend, and you start having like a bid war of prices going up and up, And I think it's not going to happen yet, because especially for CD pop, it's a very young audience, mostly students and people between, let's say, 15 and 25. But when that audience grows older, you're going to see the same thing that happened to Pokemon cards 10, 20 years back. Those people get more money and are definitely ready to spend it on the things that matter to them. Of course, all this is pure speculation, and I'm only talking about something that might never happen, but it's very worth thinking about. And it's something that will be interesting to see in 10, 20 years if tastes of people listening to music haven't changed that much and CD pop and so on is still going as strong as it is today. We might see very interesting things happening to prices. But anyway, that's all I had to say on this, and I would like to hear what you have to say on this. Would you spend $10,000 on a single album if you had the means to? I think that's what it comes down to in the end. Do people value a single record to that kind of prices? Anyway, that was Rare Japanese Sounds. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.